I'm Sarah Turner. I'm delighted to be here today presenting our case study. It was hard to find the words. An autoethnographic diary study of smart home cybersecurity practices. This paper was co-authored with Dr. Jason Nurse and Professor Shujun Lee. We are researchers at the Institute of Cybersecurity for Society, part of the School of Computing at the University of Kent. So let's start with the obvious about autoethnography. It's a complex method to consider, given it flies in the face of requirements we would typically accept as necessary for the rigour of research. It is, by definition, subjective, and the outcomes, and sometimes the methods, are going to be unrepeatable. However, it does not mean it cannot provide a framework for interesting and instructive results. My primary research area at the time, and still today, involves families using IoT devices in their home and understanding how the adults, children and anyone else in the home interacts with them and understands the cybersecurity around them. One of the reasons I'm interested in this particular area is that I'm part of a family with children who has IoT devices in their home and struggles to understand how to manage the cybersecurity around them. Coupled with the fact we're all home so much more than we ever have been at that time, being as it was the second half of 2020, it seemed to be worth a try. I was interested to perform the research for two reasons. The first, I was interested as to how well the diary method would work when considering something like cybersecurity. The diary method of qualitative research has been extremely well used in HCI for a number of years, and in a number of ways. But I had not come across one relating to people's cybersecurity practices. Was there a reason for this? And this links to the second. We know that people are just, very bad at adhering to good cybersecurity behaviours. I spend the majority of my waking hours, on the other hand, being paid to think about cybersecurity. Now, I'm very aware of the importance of reflexivity as a way of removing yourself from your object of study. So what, if anything, was I taking for granted about how people consider cybersecurity that might negatively impact my future research? So I determined to try and keep a diary. Now, this took place between August and October 2020. It wouldn't be a Dear Diary style journal with just a vague idea of the area being studied and just let me go with a pen and paper as much as I want. I decided to draw up a list of questions or prompts, the type of questions I would expect to ask participants via running a diary study. The full list of prompts are listed in the paper, but included questions such as, how did cybersecurity arise in conversation in the day? Did everyone participate? Did the children engage? And were there any conversations you avoided having about cybersecurity as a family today, and why? I wanted the questions to help me explore how often cybersecurity came up in the home, why it came up, who talked about it, and why we didn't talk about it. I decided to physically print out these questions with spaces between them so that I could write entries daily based on and around the prompts. As you can see from the picture, which shows 3 days worth of the prompts, the blank space was actually incredibly helpful. There were some days where what I wanted to write fitted easily within the spaces between the prompts. There were other days where I needed to write a lot, and so the blank backsides of the paper were there to fill. And although I'm not a particularly visual person, there were times when I could annotate, draw and link concepts, because again, the paper could be used however I wanted. I also kept any other artefacts that made me think or engage with cybersecurity as it pertained to my home. I ended up with a lot of printouts from social media, the internet and emails. I ended up printing them all out to remind me to write about them. I did not, it should be said, explicitly interview anyone in my family or around my family for this work. I tried as much as possible not to force the topic to arise in conversation just to have something to write. The uncertainty of the time, in particular with questionable access to physical school reading books, meant that we did as a family introduce more devices, notably e-readers, than we would have expected in any other normal period, enabling more discussion to take place about device setup, passwords and security than might have otherwise have happened. Now, once I finished the diary keeping period, I subjected the entire diary, artefacts and all, to inductive thematic analysis. In the interest of time, I will leave the detailed findings for you to read in the paper itself. But we came away with 3 thoughts on the process as a whole. We believe it is a useful, very low cost, albeit rather involved, method for a researcher to spend time analysing how they need to approach research subjects that may be similar to them. And this can be expanded out beyond just research. It's important for those building products and even for those considering policy in any area too. Firstly, it helps to think about how frequently you think about things just because it's your entire professional world. If it turns out that in your personal life you really have little to say about it, or everything you do say is a cry of frustration or a plea for help, then how are your non-expert users, participants or citizens going to react? Don't assume that people are engaged because you are professionally. Secondly, think about how and where you learn about your topic. Maybe you work with your product all day long. Maybe, like me, you have a Twitter feed full of industry-specific news and experts breaking stories days before the mainstream news outlets may pick it up, if they report on it at all. How much would you know if you didn't see all this information? How would your life be different if you didn't know all this information? And finally, it's really helpful to think about where you as an expert fail. Because if you find something hard, everyone else will too. If you don't have the words, it's probably your job as an expert to figure out how to make those words easily available, or to stop the situation where you need those words from coming up. It helps to put into context how much you think your research participants, your users or your citizens should have to endure. So to wrap up, we found this method very helpful for removing yourself from the situation where you are similar to the people you want to interact with, but you're not the same. Using the method and analysing the results carefully can help you reset your expectations and engage without the sorts of biases that you might otherwise bring to the process. Thank you very much for listening.